welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I am Jessica. I am here with another Jessica. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing well as well. And this is your debut book, correct?
Yes, it is.
So Jessica James is here to talk about For One Night Only, which is it's a romance, but it's like both fake dating and second chance, and it has music and fun pop culture references. And it was enjoyable to say the least. So, first of all, like I said, welcome. And why don't you give us a little bit about yourself and about this book and how it all came to be?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I actually, in my day job, I spent two of my favorite years of my life working in libraries. So I'm always so excited when I get to collaborate with a library. My background is actually in music. That's how I ended up writing a romance book about musicians for One Night Only. Like you said, it is my debut novel. It is a romance, but it's also my love letter to the way that music brings people together. It follows Valerie, who is a musician turned actress who, because of her bad reputation, her TV show is allegedly on the network chopping block. So, impulsive as she decides to get the band back together that made her famous, which means facing people that she hasn't spoken with in 6 years, including Caleb, her childhood best friend, first love, and co lead singer whose heart she broke when she drove him from the industry. So we have that bringing the band back together piece, that second chance romance, and they accidentally imply they're dating. So the fans take it and run, and they kind of lean in because they need the press. So it was a lot of fun things to play with.
And it was fun to read. And one of the
Thank you.
things I really liked that you did, and I like it when books do this a lot, is you use a lot of mixed media. So part of it is from Valerie's point of view, part of it is from Caleb's point of view, and then you kind of get a little bit of what the outside world is thinking through news clippings and social media posts, and you get a little bit into like real person fan fiction,
Mhm.
which was really interesting as well. So Valerie and Caleb are two completely different people, but they're also very similar. And I don't mean that just because, they grew up together. They both have their own family situations that they grew up in a way. Caleb was sort of the glue that held his family together. He was almost like a parentified child. Valerie's mother was probably one of the worst stage mom type situations, like one of
Mhm.
those horror stories you hear about people who live vicariously through their children and see their children as basically a paycheck. And then, you sort of take their differences where, Valerie is, like you mentioned, very impulsive. She doesn't take the easy route. She goes into television and acting. Caleb is a teacher, which is
Mhm.
probably about as, I guess steadfast as one can get. And uh they come back together in this situation. So their band, the Glitter Bats, which was a punk pop band, got really, really big back in the aughts, and then broke up after supposedly Valerie being difficult, quote unquote, broke Caleb's heart and became everybody's favorite villain. So I think like one of the things that you start off with right away is not just about, just the relationship, but also about how the media treats women specifically, as they do when they see certain, relationships. Automatically, she's the toxic person in every relationship. She's difficult, but they don't even question what's going on. And also the fact that she's bi makes her a target as
Mhm.
well. So, as a main character, writing Valerie versus writing Caleb, did you draw upon just basically what you see in the media or personal stories or people you know?
Yeah, it was a little bit of all of it. I did some research for Valerie into women in the media who have gotten a bad rap, especially for who they date, like Taylor Swift and Britney Spears. But I mean, it even goes further back to like how the media treated Marilyn Monroe. I mean, it's always been a thing when you're a woman in the media, you can't win. Um, and I don't have a personal experience being a rock star, but I do come from a high control religion where you're in those spaces where like there's a microscope on you and anything you do, like you can't win. You can't be perfect all the time, so you can't win. And so I drew on that personal experience a little bit, but it was a lot of research into celebrity culture and fan culture and parasocial relationships. But for Caleb, I drew on, I do have anxiety with like Caleb. And so I drew on those personal experiences. And I had anxiety in performing when I was a musician. And I used to think, oh, it's just stage fright and I can just like push past it. And at some point, you have to be like, no, this is a chemical imbalance that's happening in my brain. I can't get past it anymore. And that's kind of where Caleb was when he left the industry. He was like at his breaking point. And he got therapy and he got on medication. And even though it's, I mean, your anxiety doesn't go away, we see that he's already started his healing journey. And so I definitely drew on some personal experience for that. And just naturally as a musician, I know a lot of teachers. I'm married to a teacher, so writing about educators comes very naturally to me. So it felt like for someone who left the music industry but still wanted to do music in a practical way, having him become a teacher was very natural to me.
When you were kind of coming up with the plot, did the plot come first or did characters come first?
Oh gosh, with this book, actually the band name came first.
And wait a
I
second, wait a
wanted to
second. So
write a book.
the band name came first. Did it come to you the same way that it came to Caleb and
No,
Valerie?
no, and I'll save that for readers who want to read how they came up with it. But for me, I don't know. I always have kept, I mean, I've been a romance writer for a while. I started trying to write YA and that didn't work. And so I switched over to romance. And I knew I was going to work on another romance. And I was kind of interested in doing a celebrity romance. I just didn't quite have all the pieces. And my spouse and I started coming up with one summer. It was during COVID, just like, I mean, COVID's still around, but it was during the early part of the pandemic. And we were coming up with random band names. And I think we were watching Stranger Things. So like Eddie Munson and the Bats. And somehow Glitter Bats came. And I just couldn't stop thinking about it. And so this like thread of a celebrity romance that I had, I knew I wanted to maybe write about child stars. And it kind of transformed into, oh, it makes sense to write about musicians. I have a background in music. And then it just kind of fell into place from there. I outlined it in a weekend and sent it to my agent, and she's like, "Great, write it." And here we are.
So the rest of the band, like Riker and Keeley, um, do you feel like they have stories that you would eventually tell about them?
Yes, I would love to write about all of the band members. I can't talk too much about book two yet, but it is the Glitterbat series, so you'll definitely see um, some of our friends coming back, and I'm really excited to get to tell those stories. That's about as much as I can share right now. But as I was building the found family of the glitter bats, like they just started demanding more and more page time. And I know it's often in romance you go series, but with them it was just like these are feeling like real people who I would love to tell their arcs as well. I put a lot of thought into making them all very distinct, but also when they're all good together, they're great together. Like they're very supportive. Even when they clash, like they bring out the best in each other. And so I really tried to come up with characters that would complement each other.
When you're thinking about just the Glitterbats music in general, like what would you compare them to a specific band like adjacent or were they like an amalgam in your head?
We're definitely an amalgam of several bands. There's definitely some Paramore influences, a little bit of 5 Seconds of Summer, All American Rejects. Um, I also drew a little bit of inspiration. I got really into Julie and the Phantoms when it came out on Netflix, and so I got really into that music, specifically like the past music when the guys were in their own punk band, and like that kind of sounds like how the Glitter Bats might sound. But there's also a tiny bit of a Taylor Swift influence in there because I'm a Swiftie and it just naturally happens. But um, I had a lot of fun just thinking about like what their sound would be. They're definitely later pop punk. Like they would be influenced by Green Day, but certainly not contemporaries. Probably closer to being on the scene when 5 Seconds of Summer was like the mid 2010s. In order to be 28 and 29 when this book happened.
Is it difficult, like being somebody from the music background and writing about music? Does it help, or do you feel like sometimes you get kind of mucked up in the mechanics of music? And I say that as somebody who is late in life learning how to play guitar and looking at that type of composition very differently than like a book composition.
Mhm. Well, that's awesome that you're learning to play guitar. What I love about music is like you can start it at any time and then it just sticks with you. For me, it was really cathartic. I hadn't been making music, partially just because of circumstances when the pandemic started, and I was really craving like being back in those collaborative spaces. So getting into the pages and talking about what it feels like when you're like playing instruments with other folks or singing harmonies, like getting into the visceral details really felt natural. I did overanalyze writing the song lyrics. I ended up taking an online songwriting class just because I'm like, I'm not good at this anymore, and I want to be better at this. And I still wouldn't ever try to produce the music, but it was really fun. Just to kind of challenge myself a little bit to do more than just what was easy with that. But it was a fun challenge to bring that piece of my background into the writing.
So I do have to ask, and as I mentioned, there's just a lot of different parts to the story, including the media. Caleb and Valerie, by the way, their shipping name is Calorie. I'm not sure how I feel about that, but I think that you address that sort of in
Yes,
the book.
they don't
That
feel
must
good
have
about
really
it
cracked you
either.
up.
Yeah, they definitely don't feel good about that either. I have heard some really horrific um fandom names over the years. Like you can just guess where people went with Peeta Mellark and Katniss Everdeen.
I've actually
And
heard
so
Everlark recently though,
I
and
like
I'm
that
like,
one better.
why as a society? I mean, I know we're all 12 in our mind and we want to go that, route. But like, why as a society did we not embrace Everlark earlier?
I
It's
know.
lovely.
I love Everlark so much more. But just I wanted that fan relationship to be something that they liked, but also kind of had like a couple irritants with. And so I'm like, I'm going to give them a really bad ship name.
Did that inform your naming of the characters?
No, I had already named them, and I was just like, oh gosh. I started when I started doing character names. I didn't even think about ship names, and then I'm like, oh gosh, I need a ship name, and that one came to me, and I was like, oh thank God, I don't have to change anyone's name because once I start naming characters, I have a really hard time changing them through my writing process. They kind of become once I give them a name, it's like, oh, this is Valerie Quinn, this is Caleb Sloan, this is Keely Cunningham. Like they become people in my head, and so changing their names is very hard. So I was glad I didn't have to. Yeah.
And I guess like that brings me to just one more thing. So Caleb and Valerie wrote Zutara fan fiction.
hmm
For those who don't know, Zutara is the shipping name for Katara and Prince Zuko from Avatar: The Last Airbender, which I am a huge fan of, by the way. I am always very excited to see when that show pops up.
Yes.
But I do have to ask, is there any autobiographical uh, notes behind that?
No, there isn't. So when I was dabbling with the decision to write fiction, I did write fan fiction, but I kept it locked in a drawer. I never shared it with anybody. It was mostly, honestly, mostly Saddle Club fan fiction because I was a horse kid.
Oh,
That's where
you
it
go.
started.
Wow, that's not one that you hear a lot about.
But I kept it locked tight. I didn't share it with anybody. But I kind of wanted, even though all of these kids are like rock stars, I wanted to make them all a little nerdy in their own way. And so that's how I made them nerdy. It was just, well, first of all, it was whatever Valerie wanted to do, Caleb would do, because he was just gone for her since they were kids. But also it just felt like a fun thing because they started writing together, even though it wasn't writing music. And so when they started making music together, it just became a natural thing. And they became songwriting partners.
I love it so much. And I do think that having little things like that in this story makes the characters relatable. And it speaks a lot to just the changing nature of what's available in romance fiction. I know that there's it's always sort of had this reputation for being just bodice rippers, and there's
Mm.
nothing wrong with that. There are people out there who are still into that, which is fine. But I also think that it's nice that romance has kind of grown to encompass, there's that difference between, what we, want to see, which is sort of far away, but also something that feels kind of grounded and silly at the same time, because we're not all musicians, but a lot of people out there were nerdy for Avatar: The Last Airbender, and I have a lot to say about the ships that they would have preferred.
Yes, justice for Zutara. But what I love about romance is that there really is something for everyone. Especially, I feel like I know we have a lot of way to go as far as representation goes, but I think that this fight for better representation in the media is really giving romance like it's become a feminist space, it's becoming an inclusive space, and I'm just like hoping that we get to see more and more of that as the genre continues to grow and people continue to fall in love with it because it does seem like lots of different people are coming to the genre now. It's becoming more accessible, which we love.
We absolutely do. Well, thank you so much, Jessica James. When is For One Night Only out?
It is actually out today that we are recording. It's
Oh
out
my
January
goodness.
7th.
So today is January 7th, by the way. This podcast will air in a few weeks. But that means you just need to run and get it right now.
I actually am. I'm headed to my indie after this, so I'm excited to go see it in the wild.
Awesome. Okay. Well, once again, this was Jessica with Syosset Libraries Turn the Page podcast. My guest was,
Jessica James, the author of For One Night Only.
and we are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.